afternoon. So as you said, Richard, it was really just to share a few thoughts on, you say, sprint's been carried out. We've got all these ideas. We've got a plan. How do we turn insight into action? I think, as you often say, Richard. And for me, just echoing a lot of what's just been said, Ian, you said this, Becky and Marcus too, this thought around the human side of things, because this is what I was working with over sort of many years in different law firms, where a lot of the work I was doing was actually around how can we push things forwards and be a change agent, actually, for lots of things we've been trying. So I just want to think briefly about the cascading point, as you say, Richard. How do we cascade this and build momentum? I think momentum's a key word here. How do we do this? So I thought we could think about the why, the what, the who, and the how. So I just want to touch on each of those just for about a minute or so and just share a couple of thoughts on each. So if we're thinking about cascading and almost deciding on the focus, and we've heard a lot about when we've iterated our ideas, we've gone through the method, we've got a plan. So there's something here for me about the prioritization that leads to. What's going to have the biggest impact on client service and the team effectiveness. And if we can prioritize, I always think this is a great way of almost getting the message through the organization, of cascading that message down of this is why we're going about this. This is why it's really important to us. It might have come through client feedback, and we've touched on that this afternoon as well. We might even involve clients not only in the iteration process, but then perhaps as part of an advisory board as we go through the next phase. That's a great way of maintaining momentum, I've always found. If you can have that outside, that external input into the change processes you're trying to go through as well. Okay, if we move on to the what, so we could think of almost, what is the another opportunity to cascade things, I think, is defining the goalposts. And I think the design thinking method, I think, helps us here, because it's this constant iterative process. We're not just setting one goal that's then fixed and that's what we stick with. But actually, it's a great way of getting key stakeholders on side with a project. Again, the human aspect of change here, letting people co-create the goals. So I think as we cascade, as we try and turn stuff into action, as we try and build momentum, get rid of inertia, which, as we know, organizationally is often the status quo. That's what's going to want to happen organizationally. We need to get beyond that. So if we can co-create goals as we go through the iteration process, that's a lovely way of getting people on side, getting their voices heard, and all the things we've been hearing about this afternoon. And moving on to the people, which I just touched on, we could think about the who as well. So who's going to be involved in leading change? And I think Marcus, Becky, Rosemary, and Ian, you just touched on a number of these points. I'm a big fan of of the change house, that famous model from the 1970s from Klaus Janssen. And he said, you need to think about the population you're working with. Are they in the room of contentment? Are they in the room of denial, confusion, or renewal? And it's almost that change curve, that famous Kubler-Ross change curve that we often go through. And so if we're needing to work with the people and needing, again, to think about how do we cascade, analysing the human side of actually what's going to help us build momentum here as we go through the project and go through perhaps our next iteration in our next sprint and implement the sprint, then thinking about where the population is in their heads is a really, really important thing. Again, with my coach training, we're always told to be on the other person's agenda. So we need to think about where their heads are. And also that could be not just internally, it could be the clients as well. And again, it's not just the fee earners either. It's the business services teams. It's all the critical members of the firm as well as has been highlighted earlier. And just lastly, on the how, and in terms of how we cascade and how we think about that, I think my tip there would be, let's think about different methods. I used techniques such as reverse mentoring. And so in the past, and I'm thinking, how can we actually cascade things so that actually people feel a sense of involvement, they feel a sense of buy-in, they all the way up and down the organization, we have this sense of co-creation of where we're trying to get to. They understand the benefits, they've actually thought about the ideas themselves. How can we make it feel flat as an organization to let all the ideas easily percolate up and down? And that famous phrase of psychological safety as well. So within the team structures, can we think of ways in terms of perhaps there's some leadership skills we need to develop, or perhaps our leaders are already great at this, but how can we make team meetings just feel that nice, open, safe space where we can ask any question? We did an exercise with one leadership group once where we just had this thought of who speaks first in your team meetings, and actually where are ideas allowed to come from. So again, if we can cascade, Richard, I think, and just think about the who as well, then I think there's something there about getting momentum going from almost the collective wisdom of the crowd, through both within the firm and the organization, but also from our clients as well. So Richard.